Ending North Carolina's cap on charter schools passes a critical vote. Tort reform legislation continues taking shape, and lawmakers move to clearly define the use of lethal self-defense. Next.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Hello, I'm Kelly McCullen. The Senate approved lifting North Carolina's charter school cap bill this week. There is bipartisan support for the charter school concept, but real differences in how charter schools should be supervised and regulated. The Senate voted largely along party lines this week to lift the state's cap of 100 charter schools.
There's as many as 20,000 students whose parents would like for them to be in this voluntary opportunity of a charter school and aren't able to because of our, I believe, artificial limitation.
Legislation would allow unlimited charter school campuses. County governments could optionally help charter schools with building or other capital needs. Currently, charter schools receive no such funding and cannot receive it. Charters would also not face requirements they provide busing or school lunches. They are not currently required to offer either service because they don't receive funding to offer them. Charter school bill opponents say poor children will not attend charter schools if they must rely on transportation to school and school-provided food.
What we're talking about is doing something for those children who are not being treated well in school, who are not getting the education that we want them to get. And that's what this should be about. And yet I believe that what we are doing in this bill that we're proposing is wrong.
I am saddened by the fact that I don't think that we really care about education for everybody, but we care about education for those of us who can make sure our kids get it.
But charter school bill supporters say all charter schools admit students through applications filed by families. This makes them an option. Traditional public schools would still offer lunch and transportation services. A state charter school commission would be created. It would approve, monitor, and even revoke charters underneath the current State Board of Education.
The state board, though, still has a role, an important role. They could overturn actions taken by this commission. The bill states it had to be a supermajority for them to do that, but nevertheless they could if they chose to overrule actions taken by that charter commission.
The charter school cap bill heads to the House, where its leaders are on the record as supporting a lifting of the charter school cap. Senator Malcolm Graham, thanks for being on the show this week. On a scale of 1 to 10, this bill having everything you want in it, how far did it come to accomplishing that?
I think a 6. You never get everything that you want, but clearly as I take a look at public education in North Carolina and how we deliver the service in the future, charter schools is definitely a part of that. They are innovative, they're flexible. There are a number of examples throughout the state, especially in my home district in Mecklenburg County, where charter schools have been an effective tool giving access to students to be a part of a greater education environment.
You still got to get this through the House and get it signed by the governor, but if there's more charter schools in North Carolina, how will they affect the traditional public school district?
I want to create an environment where we institutionalize charter schools, where it's a part of the public offering. Just like public schools, we have charter schools. We don't want to take resources from public schools. That's not the intent. The intent is to have both of the entities, public and charter schools, model one another so we can gather best practices, give public schools some of the flexibility that charter school has, and create an environment where both institutions can strive and work side by side and institutionalize charter schools as a part of the public school offering.
What are you hearing back from public school superintendents or administrators in your district about the idea of more charter schools, an unlimited amount of charter schools possibly coming in?
Well, I think people realize that the Charter Commission, once it's established, is going to put some type of limits on the number of schools and the quality of the schools that they admit.
Could this change or public education reform, could it be a win-win for both the traditional public school and the charter? If so, how?
They can model from one another. I mean, charter schools have has enormous flexibility, smaller class sizes. Some are doing extremely well, others are failing, and they need to be dropped from the side. But still, I believe that public and charter schools, if they have the opportunity to work together, stealing best practices from one another, getting the type of instructions that charter schools are giving to their students in the public schools and vice versa. It's not either or from my perspective. How can we create a new environment in North Carolina where we can deliver public education differently, and a part of that different equation is charter schools and the charter school environment.
If there's any doubt in your mind about this possible reform coming to North Carolina, what would it be?
My biggest doubt is one that I wish we were able to get more specific language in the bill dealing with diversity, dealing with free and reduced lunch, and providing transportation for new charter schools. And secondly, my job and my goal is to try to, again, I use the same word over and over again, institutionalize charter schools. So it's just not charter schools and public schools, but those two entities coming together. I believe the governance structure may, be the linchpin that we have to come back later and kind of take a look at. We shouldn't have two dual systems, public and private. We need to have one education system in North Carolina that governs both public and charter schools.
Senator Graham, thanks for being on.
Appreciate the pleasure.
Another public education bill, this one's in the House, would cut funding for city school district superintendent salaries. The effect would be to fund one public school superintendent per county using state funds. City school districts would be allowed to use their local funding to pay their superintendent. This bill would take effect next school year. The House Education Committee holds the bill. A new idea is on the table to let students make up school days using computers. The House Education Committee will consider letting kids make up their schoolwork through online lessons and or distance learning. Local school boards could offset 5 days of classes closed by bad weather through these computer assignments. Students without computers at home would receive computer access before and after regular school hours on their local campus. Governor Bev Perdue vetoed that Republican bill allowing her to cut $400 million in current state spending, and also requiring that money scheduled to boost job incentives funds be redirected, if temporarily, into the general fund. The effort was to save money now so cuts next fiscal year will be less. Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger tells us the GOP is now offering her another proposal.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to find ways and provide tools to balance next year's budget. I mean, even with the better economic news that we've seen in terms of the collections, it looks like we're going to collect more this year than we anticipated. We still have a huge hole to fill, and the more we can save this year, the better off we're going to be next year. And so we provided her with what we felt were reasonable reductions, and she decided that she didn't want to take them. So we've got another bill that we'll be moving along that has the same target as far as dollars, and basically says to the governor, okay, you pick where the reductions are, but we still need to get to that same number.
The newly filed Senate Bill 109 is the newest proposal authorizing the governor to cut spending. The bill carries none of those mandates the vetoed Senate Bill 13 held regarding incentives money. It does match the dollar amount of the cuts listed in Senate Bill 13. That's $537 million. The governor would decide where to cut. Senate Republicans are also proposing what they call a leveling of the playing field for local governments who open businesses with private competition. Their bill targets city-owned communications companies that sell services like internet access. The bill would prevent local governments from subsidizing those companies using revenue from other city utilities like the water department. It would ban company advertising on cable access channels and prohibit pricing below market rates.
It's just fairness. I mean, government shouldn't be going up against private industry that can provide the service, quicker and less expensive, and the taxpayers aren't on the hook for it.
City-owned communications companies don't pay taxes like private companies. This bill would make them give the equivalent amount of money back to the local government as if it were taxes. The legislature has passed the bill to relieve North Carolinians from having to buy health insurance under federal health care reform laws. The legislation lets citizens ignore that individual mandate while mandating that the state attorney general's office fight the health care reform law on constitutional grounds or join with the other states in the existing lawsuit. Other parts of the incoming federal health care law are not affected, like the creating of health insurance exchanges. Bills are filed allowing the creation of these agencies in North Carolina. The exchange would operate as a nonprofit group outside the direct supervision of state government. It would offer health insurance plans to both businesses and private citizens. Beginning in 2014, the law would also require the insurance exchange operate informational websites and help consumers be better informed on their choices. The Senate Judiciary Committee is expected to finish work on medical malpractice law reform legislation early next week. The details of tort reform have demanded a slower pace than even GOP committee leaders expected. Senate GOP-backed tort reform legislation entered its second week of committee debate this week. Supporters of this bill say financial damage awards ought to be capped up to $500,000 for non-economic damages like pain and suffering. Supporters also believe emergency room doctors who make unintended mistakes that hurt a patient should be protected as well.
I think that the bill sits in very good position to balance the concerns that we all have about defensive medicine costs, physicians being sued needlessly, and at the same time making sure we protect the public. I think it does both.
Tort reform supporters say it's open-ended verdicts that make it difficult for doctors to do their jobs in North Carolina. They also believe doctors will over-test their patients, driving up medical costs and theoretically driving down the chance that a patient will sue. Emergency room doctors, supporters say, should be protected because they're facing snap judgments when treating patients. Tort reform would allow for some medical mistakes to be made for which no lawsuit could seek compensation.
We are reducing the incentives for good patient safety in hospitals. For instance, in the emergency room. No emergency room doctor wants to commit negligence, but it happens sometimes. And what this bill does, for the first time for any professional, it says even if you're negligent, the person who's injured gets $0. They get no compensation.
It's a legal definition of the word negligence that seems to make the difference. Honest medical mistakes can be negligent acts by legal term and subject to lawsuit damage awards. Republican and some Democratic lawmakers say it's these mistakes made while a doctor is trying his or her best to help a patient that need protection from litigation.
Reduce that duty in this bill to emergency room physicians who are functioning under the constraints that they function under. That's what the bill does. We have decided to make that policy decision to protect emergency room physicians in those cases.
The tort reform bill would hold doctors liable without damage awards caps for acts of gross negligence in practicing medicine, but some Democrats say gross negligence as a term means practical immunity for doctors.
Negligence is quite extreme. You have to have, it's a wanton disregard for your actions. It is almost intentional. So it would be things like coming to work drunk, or coming to work under the influence of drugs. If you performed your medical duty under those circumstances, you'd be grossly negligent.
The Senate Judiciary Committee will review amendments on Tuesday, including more tweaks to the cap on non-economic damages, as well as some provisions that could protect obstetricians. The Senate Judiciary Committee resumes tort reform talks next Tuesday morning. A joint legislative committee aimed at reducing state regulations is officially ready for service. 9 Senate, 9 House members will hold a statewide listening tour where they'll be taking notes on regulations that they believe and hear are burdensome or harmful to the economy. That public feedback will be evaluated before the 2012 legislative session. The committee would expire at year's end 2012. Bipartisan House legislation could limit campaign contributions made by state vendors. It's House Bill 139. It would limit state vendor contributions to $500 per election if the vendor contract is worth more than $25,000. Vendor employees would also face campaign contribution limits. The bill would take effect January 1st, 2012. Felons who are state employees could lose state retirement benefits. Some Republican and Democratic House members are pushing this effort. Felons would receive their contributions back plus interest following a conviction. 2 provisions must be met before a state employee's felony conviction would cost them retirement. The crime must be committed while the person is employed with the state, number 1, and the criminal charge must be linked with the employee's job duties. Legislation was filed a few weeks ago to term limit the House Speaker and Senate President pro tem positions to 2 two-year terms. Mecklenburg County Representative Rick Killian proposes term limits for every lawmaker. State voters would consider a new state constitutional amendment if the bill clears the legislative process. Senators and House members would be able to serve a maximum of 4 consecutive two-year terms. Representative Rick Killian, a Mecklenburg County Republican, joins us to discuss term limits for every lawmaker.
That's right.
Why do you want to amend the Constitution to tell lawmakers it's time to go home after 8 years?
Well, Kelly, first of all, I believe in a citizen legislature. I always have. I'm very proud of the fact that I'm able to come here on behalf of my constituents and serve them. But I also believe that I should be able to go home and raise a family and maintain a business or complete the occupation that I have, do other things. I don't believe that we were sent here to be professional, or I should say, lifetime legislatures. And the way that the issue stands now, my understanding is that it would require a constitutional amendment, which we placed on the ballot. I believe the bill calls for 2012.
But what's to be said for the experience of being a lawmaker? Because there's sometimes good payoff for getting those gray hairs of life, and would this short circuit that?
I don't really think so. In my 4 years now, working in my 3rd term, I found that, sure, the learning curve is very steep at first, and it really is overwhelming when you do get here, regardless if you're in the majority or the minority party. But it's not that difficult of a process, and I find that most legislators are able to pick it up fairly quickly. Many other states have done this, and they've actually have term limits of just 6 years, and what we're proposing here is a total of 8. And the other thing is that's just a point to start the discussion. So it may be a little bit less, it may be a little bit more.
Do you see it being an 8-year consecutive term of service before you would take a break? Is it a lifetime limit, or can you take a pause and come back to
Well, there are
office?
several ways to draft the bill, and I've got some other thoughts as to how it might be amended, but as it's written today, it essentially says that you're limited to 4 consecutive terms, which means, as you indicated, you could come back and serve again.
What changes about your perspective of what happens in North Carolina when you're in Raleigh several months a year?
If you look back, you find that it's very difficult for a person to maintain their life at home with respect to businesses and so forth. And so as a result, what happens is people begin to naturally, not any fault of their own, but because of the difficulty of having 2 different lives, gravitate to this one. And this becomes all-encompassing for them. And clearly there are advantages to incumbency. And if you look back at who comes back and who does not, there are advantages to incumbency. And I think what this does is it begins to level the playing field. After, arguably 6, 8, or even 10 years, a person who has been in office has an advantage. And I think it's fair to put that aside and allow another person from the district to come in and make a run at it. And you know what? If that member chooses to come back, they're very capable and willing and welcome to run again in a different chamber or even in the same chamber.
Representative Killian, thanks for being on the show this week to explain that bill.
Thank you.
Representative Killian wants the state to create its own criminal terrorism charges. People could face in-state felony charges for training, aiding, and abetting terrorists. Real and personal property used in connection with terror activities would be forfeited. It outlines guidelines by which authorities could search closed community compounds suspected of illegal paramilitary activity. Democratic Representative Jim Crawford says thieves are targeting North Carolina because state laws on larceny simply don't deter them. So he's proposing the creation of a new felony status for people convicted on repeated but small dollar larcenies. Current state law calls for misdemeanor charges only, no matter how many convictions a thief may receive. The new felony offense called habitual misdemeanor larceny would be triggered on the 8th larceny conviction.
We have a group in Vance County that's playing the game. They have a group that makes their living stealing from different communities. They have been caught in Greensboro, in Wilmington, in Greenville, and they're staying under the statutes. They've been caught many times, but it's a misdemeanor, so they just get a slap on the wrist and they back out again.
Only adults at least 18 years old could be classified under the proposed habitual larceny offense. That felony would earn some jail time. Legislation allowing for lethal self-defense if you feel your life is threatened cleared the Senate this week. The bill began its legislative journey as a measure to protect a person while they're in their home. It leaves the Senate expanded. The Senate neared final approval of the Castle Doctrine this week. It would clarify the circumstances under which a person can use lethal self-defense measures.
You don't have the 3 seconds to reflect on 3 years of law school or experience as an attorney to think of the legalities or the what we have in North Carolina of what you can do to defend your family, to defend yourself.
The Senate bill offers immunity for defensive measures taken when a person fears for his or her life. The original bill covered home invasions, but the bill that passed on Thursday was expanded to include protections for people who defend themselves while in their vehicles and in the workplace.
There are just many, many instances in our society where this question needs to be cleared up, and people, we all know, have the right to defend themselves.
Some Democrats say they support leniency for people protecting their homes, as the original Castle Doctrine outlined, but they reject the business protections or protections offered for vehicle drivers who face fear.
I'm awful concerned that there will be people, good intended people, who might be going into a community or an area where they're already apprehensive, and they're going to come packing with their gun on the front seat. And the minute somebody comes up and knocks on that glass, it might be a homeless person looking for a handout. Could be somebody looking for directions. Could be somebody sitting there trying to clean your windshield and you didn't really want it clean. But if you're already apprehensive and your gun's right there on the front seat, you might just decide to shoot them.
The Castle Doctrine also protects home, vehicle, and business owners from civil suits arising from them taking self-defense measures. District's attorney would make the ultimate decision as to whether or not a person claiming Castle Doctrine protection is justified in making that claim. The bill is expected to head to the State House following a third procedural vote on Monday night. A second vote on Thursday afternoon showed majority Senate support. The Senate holds House legislation targeting registered sex offenders who work as emergency medical technicians. House Bill 59 would prohibit sex offenders from receiving EMT credentials. Current EMTs who are registered offenders could not renew their credentials. The ban would take effect immediately if it becomes law. Technology could help crack down on work and school zone speeding. A bipartisan group of House members want a small rollout of speed detection cameras in both school and work zones. If you speed, the camera would take a picture of your license plate and send you a ticket in the mail. Road signs, in fairness, would warn drivers that cameras were in operation.
It has very specific criteria that's going to require that the cameras can't be set anything less than 11 miles per hour over the speed limit.
You're really burning it up.
Yeah, you're really burning it up if you're going to be ticketed under this bill. We don't want anything that's a close call or any of those issues. It also has complete mechanisms in to send an affidavit saying, look, I wasn't driving. I may be the owner of the vehicle, but X, Y, or Z was. And so that it has a due process component so people can get out if they weren't in fact the driver.
The fine would be $250, with the money helping public schools and the Civil Penalties Litigation Fund. There's another bill that could make it expensive to speed in school zones, cameras or not. Catawba County Senator Austin Allred says it's time school zone speeding be given equal punishment to getting caught speeding in work zones.
This is a very straightforward bill. The only thing it does is raise the fine from $25 to $250, which makes it consistent with the fine in construction zones. All we're saying is that we value school children as much as we value construction workers.
The Senator's proposed $250 fine would take effect this December 1st. The House Finance Committee will review legislation strengthening fines and punishments for convicted drunk drivers. The bill, called Laws Law, originally required mandatory jail terms if drunk drivers had other circumstances surrounding their conviction. Things like driving drunk with your license already revoked or drunk driving with a minor under 16 in the vehicle. The bill sponsors shortened the mandatory jail sentence by 4 months, but added a requirement that those convicted be supervised for 4 months.
Instead of just having the person in jail 4 more months, if we can get something to maybe help them deal with whatever the problem is on the back end, that's fine. But they still need to be facing the certainty of jail time, which they do with this.
Sponsors say increased court fees on all DWI convictions will cover the jail costs of offenders sentenced under Laws Law. Senate Majority Leader Harry Brown's effort to ban synthetic marijuana and a chemical called methadone passes the Senate and moves to the House next week. K2 is the common name of the synthetic cannabinoid. Methadone is a synthetic stimulant. Senator Brown says these unregulated products are dangerous. There's no quality control, especially with K2.
It's just all over the board about the effects that it has. So it's really not controlled at all. Some of it has been measured to be maybe 10, 12 times more potent than marijuana. It's just some bad stuff.
Methadone would be banned this coming December 1st. K2 would leave store shelves on April 1st. The debate on limiting marriage to one man and one woman will begin in the Senate this session. Some GOP senators have filed legislation that could lead to a referendum on placing a marriage definition in North Carolina's Constitution. Senator Jim Forrester has filed this bill for several sessions, and he says he's never received a committee hearing.
Apparently 30 other states have it in their Constitution. North Carolina doesn't. It's the only state in the South that doesn't have it. And we need to let the people have the opportunity to vote on it.
Voters would consider the marriage amendment on the November 2012 ballot. North Carolina Now Legislative Week in Review is online all the time. We'd love to be your Facebook friend. Search us out on Facebook. Type in Legislative Week in Review. On Twitter, our handle is @NCN Leg Week. And you can always email us. We'll read every note you send us, legweek@unctv.org. And our 24/7 website is unctv.org/legweek. Well, that's our show for this week. We hope to see you next time.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.